Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be tackling alimony laws in India. And honestly, I was blown away by all the stuff you sent over. Articles, legal websites, all sorts of things. So get ready, because I think there are going to be some surprises. We're going to cover what alimony is, who can claim it, and how those amounts are determined. And then we'll get into temporary versus permanent alimony, how things work for Muslim women, and the unique situation under the Special Marriage Act. And of course, to help us make sense of all of it, we have the amazing expert speaker here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. You always do such a fantastic job of explaining these complex legal topics. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is alimony in India?
Well, you can think of it as a way to ensure financial support for a spouse after a divorce or separation. It's a legal obligation and something that's becoming more and more relevant as awareness of these laws grows.
So it's not just like a goodwill gesture and an informal thing. There's an actual legal framework.
Yeah.
It's not just about like basic survival either, right? Some of the stuff you sent over mentioned courts talking about maintaining a decent standard of living. What does that mean exactly?
That's a really important point. A lot of people think alimony is only about making sure someone doesn't fall into poverty, but Indian courts have consistently said that it's also about making sure the spouse can maintain a similar standard of living to what they were used to during the marriage.
So like taking into account their lifestyle,
Yeah.
the assets they shared, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that divorce can have a huge financial impact, especially for someone who might have given up career opportunities or financial independence during the marriage.
It's about trying to make things a bit more fair.
Right. Alimony is about recognizing the contributions of both partners and making sure neither one is unfairly disadvantaged after the split.
Now, something that really stood out to me was the whole duration of the marriage thing. I was honestly surprised to learn that marriages over a decade can often lead to lifelong alimony.
Yeah, that's definitely something that catches people off guard.
So what's the thinking behind that?
Well, it all comes down to how financially intertwined the couple has become after a certain number of years. And courts often see a decade as a pretty significant marker. It's assumed that one spouse might have sacrificed a lot, maybe their career, maybe other opportunities, to support the marriage.
And maybe they've become used to a certain way of life, and it would be really tough for them to suddenly change.
Exactly. So in those situations, the courts want to provide some long-term security.
Makes sense. So it's not just about whether or not they could get a job. It's about recognizing the impact their decisions had within the marriage. Now, besides how long the marriage lasted, what other things do courts consider when they're figuring out alimony?
Age, health, and earning capacity are all huge factors. Think about it. If someone is older, not in good health, or can't earn much because of those sacrifices we talked about, the court is much more likely to award them alimony. And it might even be for a longer period of time.
Right. And I remember one of the articles had this example of a case where one spouse had some health problems.
Yeah.
And that played a big part in how the court decided things. It really shows how much of a difference those factors can make. Now, I know there are two main types of alimony, temporary and permanent. Can you explain what makes them different?
Absolutely. Temporary alimony, which is also sometimes called pendente lit, is what's granted while the divorce is actually happening.
So like before anything is finalized.
Yeah, think of it as a bridge. It provides some support while the couple is sorting out the bigger issues, like who gets what property and how much permanent alimony there will be.
And permanent alimony is what happens after everything is finalized.
Exactly. It's the ongoing support that's decided on as part of the divorce settlement.
So temporary is like a safety net
Mm-hmm.
during that whole process. One article I read mentioned a woman who requested temporary support just to cover her living expenses while her divorce case was going on, which can take years sometimes.
Yeah, it definitely can.
Okay, so now let's get into some specifics about how alimony works under different laws in India. Starting with Hindu law, I think. Am I right that both husbands and wives can ask for alimony?
You are. It's all laid out in sections 24 and 25 of the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955. What's interesting is that either spouse can ask for support. It doesn't matter who's asking.
That's great. It seems like things are moving in a more modern direction, where it's recognized that both partners can contribute financially, and both partners might need support.
Absolutely.
I even read about a case where a husband tried to get alimony, but he was denied because he was physically able to work.
Yeah, it seems like proving genuine need is a big part of it.
So it's not like an automatic thing just because you're a spouse. You have to show the court that you're really struggling financially.
Right, the court is looking for real hardship.
Now, I also came across the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, or HAMA, And it seems to be really focused on protecting the rights of wives. One thing that jumped out at me
Hmm.
is that it lets a wife live separately without losing her right to alimony. That seems like a big deal.
It is. It gives women a way to leave a bad situation,
Hmm.
or maybe just an unhappy marriage, without worrying about being cut off financially. It recognizes that a woman shouldn't have to stay in a marriage just for financial security.
It's about having options
Yeah.
and being able to make choices that are best for them.
Yep.
Okay, so we've talked about Hindu law. Now, for Muslim women, it seems like there's even more to navigate. The stuff you sent over mentioned alimony claims out of the Criminal Procedure Code, Shariat, and the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act. And then there's the Shabano case, which seems like a pretty landmark case.
Oh, absolutely.
It highlights that whole tension between personal law and secular legislation. Can you walk us through that a bit?
So the Charbonneau case was pretty groundbreaking. What happened was the Supreme Court said that a divorced Muslim woman was entitled to maintenance under a secular law. Section 125 of the Criminal Procedure Code, to be exact.
But that's not typically how things were handled. Right?
No, it wasn't. It caused a lot of controversy
Oh.
because some people felt like it was interfering with Muslim personal law.
So it sparked a lot of debate.
A lot of debate. And
Oh,
in the
okay.
end,
Yeah.
it actually led to a new law specifically for Muslim women, the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act.
Wow. So this one case really shook things up.
It did.
It makes you realize that these legal systems are constantly changing, trying to find that balance between individual rights
Yeah.
and cultural or religious considerations. Now, speaking of unique situations,
Yeah.
we also have the Special Marriage Act of 1955, which is for couples from different religions who want to get married. What sets this one apart?
Well, unlike the Hindu Marriage Act or the laws we just talked about for Muslim women, the Special Marriage Act only lets the wife ask for alimony.
So the husband can't. That's interesting. It seems a bit out of step with the whole idea of equality in a relationship. Yeah. Especially if it's supposed to be a secular and progressive law.
Yeah, and it's definitely led to some discussions about whether it's fair. Some legal experts think it shows some outdated ideas about husbands and wives and how they contribute to a marriage.
It's like the law hasn't quite caught up to the times. Wow. There really is so much to think about here. It makes you wonder about the bigger picture and how all of these laws are tied to social norms and cultural values. And it's not even just about alimony itself, right? There are other things a wife can claim after a separation.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
One of the articles talked about how a wife has exclusive rights to her possessions, even stuff like jewelry and inherited property. I was surprised to learn that it doesn't matter if her in-laws are holding on to those things.
That's right. Indian law is really clear about protecting a woman's personal assets. It doesn't matter where they are physically. It's about ensuring she has financial independence and preventing anyone from taking advantage of her during a separation or divorce.
It's about protecting her rights. And what about the right to live in the marital home? I read that a wife can stay there until the divorce is finalized. And one source even mentioned a case where the Supreme Court upheld a wife's right to alternate accommodation if she needed it.
Yeah, those are important provisions. They're designed to keep a woman from being forced out of her home during a time when she's already going through a lot.
It makes sense. Having a place to live is such a basic need.
Exactly. And the courts recognize that. It also shows a shift in thinking towards seeing the home as a shared space and not just something that belongs to the husband.
So even if the property is legally in the husband's name, the law is still on her side.
Exactly.
Wow, this is all so much more complicated than I ever imagined. Alimony and these related claims are about way more than just money. It's about making sure things are fair,
Right.
protecting people's rights, and recognizing that relationships are complex.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's really about ensuring justice and equity for everyone involved.
This has been eye-opening. I feel like I'm starting to see alimony laws in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear that. It's like the law recognizes that a woman's right to a home goes beyond just staying in that specific house.
Hmm.
It's about having a safe and secure place to live, no matter what.
Yeah, it's about that feeling of stability,
Yeah.
especially when everything else feels so up in the air. And it's not just about the house itself, right? A wife can also claim a share of anything they own together,
That's right.
like bank accounts, investments,
Yeah,
even businesses.
exactly. The courts try to divide things fairly. They consider financial contributions, of course, but they also look at things like homemaking and raising children,
Yeah.
recognizing that those are valuable contributions too.
It's about seeing the marriage as a true partnership. And speaking of important cases, one of the articles mentioned the Daniel Latifi v. Union of India case. It had something to do with Muslim women and alimony. And it sounded like it was a big deal.
Oh, the Daniel Latifi case is crucial. It really helps us understand the complexities of alimony for Muslim women. Basically, it challenged a law from 1986. The Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act. It argued that this law was unfair to women.
How so?
Well, it limited their right to alimony to just the iddat period.
Yeah, the iddat period. That's the time right after the divorce, usually about 3 months, I think.
Yep, 3 months. And before this case, it was often thought that a husband's financial responsibility ended after that.
But the court said no.
The Supreme Court said absolutely not. A Muslim husband's duty goes beyond just the iddat period. He has to provide for his divorced wife's future.
So this wasn't just about one woman's case. It set a precedent for all Muslim women.
Huge precedent.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it didn't stop there. The court also said that if the husband's family was going to inherit from him, they could also be responsible for providing for his divorced wife.
So it's the kind of shared responsibility.
Exactly. It's about making sure the woman isn't left in a vulnerable position.
It also highlights how important things like WAC boards are. They can step in and provide support if family members can't. This case really shows how important it is to have strong laws to protect women financially after a divorce.
Couldn't agree more.
Now, earlier we touched on the Special Marriage Act, the one that's for interfaith couples, and we talked about how it only lets wives claim alimony. What are the implications of that, especially for couples who choose to marry outside of their religions?
It's a great question. And it definitely raises some concerns about gender bias, especially since this law is supposed to be secular and progressive.
Does seem a bit contradictory.
Some experts say it reflects these old-fashioned ideas about the roles of husbands and wives.
Like the law hasn't quite caught up to how relationships work today.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder why that distinction was made in the first place. Speaking of historical context, one article went into this idea of Stradhan, which is a woman's personal property under Hindu law.
Streethun is such a fascinating concept. It basically covers any property that a woman owns in her own right, things like gifts she gets at her wedding, inheritances, or anything she earns or buys herself.
It's hers to manage and control.
Exactly.
And what's really important is that even if her husband or his family is holding onto her Stradhan legally, they're just taking care of it for her.
They're considered trustees. They have a duty to keep it safe.
There was a Supreme Court case about this, right?
Yes, the Pradeep Harani v. Suraj Kumar case. The court made it clear that Stradhan still matters, even with newer laws like the Hindu Marriage Act and the Hindu Succession Act.
It's like this extra layer of protection.
Exactly. It protects women's financial independence and makes sure no one can take advantage of them.
And just being married doesn't give a husband any rights to his wife's Stradhan.
Nope. He can't just claim ownership because it's in his possession.
So no automatic transfer of ownership.
Right.
It's really important. It shows that even under these older laws, marriage is still seen as a union of two individuals,
Right.
each with their own rights.
I think you've hit on a key point there. These examples really highlight how alimony laws in India are this mix of social norms, cultural values, and legal principles that are always evolving.
It's fascinating how much goes into it.
And it underscores why it's so important for people to understand these laws, especially if they're going through a separation or divorce.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Absolutely.
You know, it's interesting how all of this connects to this idea of relationships in the nature of marriage. Some of the articles mention that.
Ah, yes. That's a really interesting area of law that's gaining more attention.
It sounds like it's about recognizing that relationships can be complex and maybe don't always fit neatly into those traditional categories.
Exactly. It's about those relationships that function like a marriage. Maybe the couple lives together, they're financially dependent on each other, they share a household, but they might not have had a formal wedding ceremony.
So the law is starting to acknowledge that these relationships can create obligations too.
Exactly. And when those relationships end, there needs to be a way to ensure fairness, just like in a divorce.
Makes sense. So what kind of things do the courts look at to decide if a relationship counts as in the nature of marriage?
Well, they might consider how long their relationship lasted. Did they present themselves as a married couple to other people? Did they have joint finances, shared responsibilities, maybe even children together? It's not just about living in the same house. It's about the level of commitment and how intertwined their lives were.
It's about recognizing that a marriage isn't the only way to build a life together.
Right. And this area of law is still developing, but it's a step towards recognizing the different ways people build relationships today.
And it's about fairness. making sure that someone isn't left struggling
Mm-hmm.
just because they weren't technically married.
Exactly. It's about protecting the more vulnerable partner,
Yeah.
especially if they made sacrifices for the relationship.
So this concept of relationships in the nature of marriage, does it affect anything besides just alimony?
It can, actually. It can affect things like inheritance, property division, even child custody.
So it's something to keep in mind.
Definitely.
It's amazing to see how the legal system is adapting to the way relationships are changing.
It really is. And it makes these conversations about alimony all the more relevant and important.
Yeah, it's amazing how all these cases shape the law. It's like it's constantly learning and adapting.
It really is a living, breathing thing.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into alimony laws in India, what's the big takeaway for our listeners? What should they keep in mind beyond all the specifics?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand is that these laws are really about justice and fairness. They're about recognizing that both spouses contribute to a marriage.
Right. We've talked a lot about financial contributions.
Yeah.
But it's also about things like taking care of the home, raising children,
Mhm.
supporting a spouse's career.
Exactly. And alimony is there to make sure
Right.
that when a marriage ends, neither spouse is left at a disadvantage. It's like a safety net.
Yeah.
Especially for the spouse who might have put their own goals on hold to support the marriage.
It's about recognizing that it was a partnership.
Exactly.
And when that partnership ends, there needs to be a fair way to divide things up.
And that fairness isn't just about the money. It's also about making sure both people have a safe place to live, especially when there are kids involved.
Which is where those rules about the marital home come in.
Exactly.
It's all about protecting people.
And giving them the resources they need to start over after a separation or divorce.
It's not about punishing one person or rewarding the other. It's about finding a solution that's just and fair.
Exactly. At
Yep.
the end of the day, it's about recognizing everyone's dignity and worth.
Well said. This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has been.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of this whole area of law now.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And for anyone out there going through a separation or divorce, my advice is to know your rights. Talk to a good lawyer. And don't be afraid to stand up for what you deserve.
Great advice. And if you're looking for more expert legal insights, make sure you like and subscribe to Legum Doctors. We're always here to help you navigate the legal world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone, and we'll see you next time.